Good evening. For years now, allegations have swirled around that the authorities protected prominent paedophiles from exposure and prosecution. Tonight, our investigations correspondent Nick Hopkins has dramatic evidence of one such cover-up. Over 3 months, he and his producer Jake Morris have pieced together the shocking story of how a group of detectives investigating a paedophile ring in South London swooped on an MP and other prominent figures, only to be told to shut down their inquiry and never speak of it again. Nick's disclosures come on the same day the police watchdog, the IPCC, announced it is investigating allegations of corruption in the Met relating to child sex offences from the 1970s to the 2000s. Nick's here. Nick, what have you learned?
Well, look, so far, Kirsty, the focus in historic cases of child abuse has been on victims, survivors and their abusers. But what the IPCC has done today is to put the spotlight firmly on the police themselves. Now, this isn't about claims that the police did not properly investigate allegations. It is about that they undertook inquiries and then abandoned them, indeed, rigorous inquiries, and then abandoned them to protect powerful and influential people. Now, for the past 4 months, we've been looking at allegations of this type from Lambeth in South London in the early 1980s. And we've been told of an inquiry where police officers were warned that if they continued to investigate what they were looking at, that they would be prosecuted on the Official Secrets Act, and indeed the inquiry itself was completely abandoned. Now, when we first spoke to Scotland Yard about this about 2 months ago, we were told that they were looking at it, and we understand now that both the Yard and the IPCC are looking at our allegations as part of this broad sweep into collusion and corruption at possibly the highest levels of the police. Here's what we found. A mile from Westminster, half a mile from MI6. Long gone tenements that may have held dark secrets. There's no sign of Coronation buildings now. They were unloved, fell into disrepair, and were eventually knocked down. But not before they were the focus of a child abuse inquiry by Scotland Yard. Now, 35 years on, an officer familiar with that inquiry has come forward to tell its story and how it came to a sudden and mysterious end. The operation targeted a number of properties in South London, but particularly a flat in Coronation Buildings. The officer described how over the course of 3 months, a small team of detectives watched the flat. A caretaker helped them install a video camera which showed boys being sexually abused by men. It was a trade that linked London's paedophile-infiltrated care homes with the House of Commons. One of the men caught on camera was the Liberal MP Cyril Smith. Another, a senior member of Britain's intelligence agencies. There was evidence of abuse by police officers too. The surveillance team had made witness statements, known as MG11s, and details had been logged with C11, Scotland Yard's intelligence unit. One evening, they made their move on a property in Streatham. Officers burst into a sex party and arrested Smith, among others. We've been told they were driven north of the river and brought here to the old Cannon Row police station, within sight of Downing Street and the House of Commons. But this did not set in train the prosecution that officers had imagined. Far from it. Newsnight has been told that the duty sergeant on that night was stopped in his tracks and pilloried for even contemplating keeping Smith in custody. To the astonishment of those who witnessed it, the MP was released. Days later, and south of the river, another astonishing twist when the officers reconvened at their base. That base was here, on the first floor of the Met's Gilmore House, just a mile from Coronation Buildings. We've been told that the squad was called together here and addressed by a senior officer they'd never met before. There was a row, and it ended up with detectives being ordered to hand over all their evidence: notebooks, photos, videos, the lot. They were given a reassurance that Smith would no longer play an active role in public life, a reassurance that ended up being hollow. And there was a warning: speak again of this operation and you will be breaking the Official Secrets Act. 35 years after the operation at Coronation Buildings, with the renewed focus on the secrets of the past, politicians offer whistleblowers protection. But in this case, that cuts little ice. Our source won't go on camera. He has given his account to the BBC through an intermediary to reduce the risk of being identified. But his story has been examined by Clive Driscoll, a Scotland Yard detective who investigated child abuse in Lambeth and later prosecuted the murders of Stephen Lawrence. Mr. Driscoll, you've examined these claims. What do you make of them?
Well, I think that I looked at them as I probably would have done when I was a police officer, and on the balance of probabilities, you would have to say they appear very credible. Certainly the timing and the type of allegations that are made are one that I'm sure the Metropolitan Police would take very, very seriously. If you take all of the information that appears to be out there together, it does look like collusion with police officers and other agencies to prevent what is a straightforward criminal case. I personally can't condone that. I think it's wrong.
Of all the allegations made against Cyril Smith since his death 5 years ago, this appears the most egregious example of a cover-up involving police collusion.
Time and again, what we've learnt more recently is that a number of police officers investigated Smith up and down the country, and those investigations were quashed, and officers were told to stop investigating him. That Smith was being protected, and he was being protected by some fairly powerful people, and I think he was being protected because he knew of other paedophiles in the networks in which he operated, and had he been prosecuted, then I think those other people would have been named by Smith, and that's why they ensured that he was never put before the courts.
What would you say to officers who are still frightened by the threat of the Official Secrets Act, who have been threatened in this way to come forward?
But never forget that detectives are fathers, husbands, sons, daughters. They have their own families. It's incredibly difficult. If you felt that by coming forward and just telling the truth, that you might have your livelihood taken away from you, or you were still maybe, taken to prison, then that's very difficult. If it's true that there are officers that want to come forward, but they feel inhibited by the Official Secrets Act, and if what the general information that appears to come from them is true, it is disgraceful. It is just wrong, and it would undermine our democracy.
We put the main allegations to Scotland Yard weeks ago, but the Met has refused to comment on the details. However, a spokesman said the force's anti-corruption command
is investigating allegations that police officers acted inappropriately in relation to non-recent child abuse investigations.
It wants witnesses to come forward. Unlike many tales of child abuse, the story of Coronation Buildings is not one of victims being ignored or disbelieved. This appears to be a case where police knew what was going on. They'd seen it with their own eyes, yet they were ordered to stop. If true, this is an open and shut case of a remarkable cover-up.
Well, Nick, what happens now?
Well, I think the IPCC is going to come up against the same problems that the Met has, and indeed we have during our investigations, and that is that many of the people involved in this are dead. Those that are alive are afraid to come forward. And I think what they're looking for is an unambiguous statement from both ministers and the police that if they come forward, they will not face repercussions. Now, ministers have said in the past that the Official Secrets Act should not be a bar, an impediment to coming forward, but frankly...
It needs to be explicit.
It needs to be explicit. They need a cast iron guarantee to give them the confidence to come forward and give up their secrets.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. Well, Alison Miller is a lawyer who represents survivors of child abuse, some of whom have been consulted by the Goddard inquiry. She's with me now. We'll come on to the question of the Official Secrets Act in a moment. But first of all, were you shocked by what you saw there?
Well, yes, I am shocked. Although stories of cover-ups and police investigations being stopped have been circulating for a while now, your report and also the IPCC statement earlier today that 14 allegations which together constitute high-level, serious cover-up by the Metropolitan Police. Yes, it is shocking.
Why do you think these officers stayed quiet, have stayed quiet for so long?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can only speculate, but the threat of the Official Secrets Act, potentially the Code of Omerta that tends to prevent people speaking up in institutions such as the police may be responsible.
I mean, as Nick said, some of the officers are possibly dead now, but some won't be. And some who saw that footage taken of Cyril Smith and others, who to have photographs, notes, have kept quiet about it all these years.
Well, yes, and you would think that this is something that, will have lived with them for all those years, and with, an explicit guarantee that they will not face sanctions, they will not face prosecution or other repercussions, perhaps financial. One would hope that now there has been a sea change and they will come forward.
So Theresa May, you're saying, has to make it quite explicit that people coming forward from the forces would not be subject to the Official Secrets Act?
Yes, I think so.
You deal with a lot of victims of abuse. How does what's happening here accord with what you've been hearing?
Well, I think obviously the great majority of my clients and other survivors of abuse have not been abused by parliamentarians and other prominent high-profile people, but they will. I think this will chime with them in that it will chime with their experience of not being listened to and not being believed. And I think really, if it can be shown really that people who, despite their reputation and status, can be investigated, and that institutions will respond to that without being corrupted in this way. That is terribly important. And what is important really here is that it exposes any corruption in the response of the police and other institutions to child abuse, so that this kind of dark, really secret, that's underpinning our society can be shone a light on.
Because the other side of this, of course, is that if that footage was taken, there were photographs taken, so the victims of Cyril Smith, who perhaps haven't even come forward, now know that actually what happened to them was witnessed by the police.
Well, I think that will be shocking and horrifying for those people. And it is just so desperately important, really, that there is a full and fearless investigation into these so serious allegations.
But can the IPPC, do you think, do that, given that they're actually just looking at the Metropolitan Police's homework? They're not doing it themselves.
Well, I think there needs to be a symbiotic relationship, really, between the IPCC and the Goddard inquiry, so that information that comes out of this, obviously not when it's the subject of active criminal investigations, can then be looked at by the inquiry, so there can be a kind of joined-up response to this. I have to say, one thing that has slightly disappointed me on behalf of my clients today is that this is a managed IPCC investigation, but it is the Metropolitan Police's Professional Standards Department that is doing the investigation, and really, given the seriousness of these allegations, one has to question whether really the Metropolitan Police should have any hand in investigating it.
The other thing I was going to ask was in terms of time scale. Now this has been decided today and we've had our film tonight. Presumably speed is of the essence.
Absolutely. Documents, as has been said, are difficult to trace. There needs to be a search for those witnesses. People involved in this are not getting any younger. People have to get on with it now, and also so that this doesn't delay the Goddard inquiry.
Alison Miller, thank you very much indeed.